Well, it took me a few minutes to figure out what they were talking about the pocketbooks. Then I remembered the pocketbook stories. There were several pocketbook stories, actually, because those women had pocketbooks. I mean, they didn't have these little, long strapped things like you'll fill up with all this fluffy little pink stuff, throw up on your shoulder. They had substantial pocketbooks, great big old things, about that size. Would you hold that up way high so everybody can see it? That's kind of the type pocketbook. Or better yet, they had pocketbooks about this size, and the straps on them were about this long, and they kind of, they would yawn open. The straps were on either side, and it would yawn open, and the stuff that they would have down in that pocketbook, they could disappear. Half of their body would dive down into this pocketbook. And there would be all kind of things coming up out of there while they were searching down in that pocketbook for something. Hairpins, little handkerchiefs with coins tied up in them. And Granny would have a full place setting for 8 people with a tablecloth and cutlery, everything, to where that after church, if she decided to have a picnic, she would just work that pocketbook down off of her arm, thump it down on the ground, dive down in there, and half of her body would disappear into that pocketbook, and she would come up and sling out a tablecloth and then just start shuffling plates out onto that tablecloth. And she would create 8 settings there for all of us to sit around by the creek and have a nice picnic. Also in that pocketbook would be a roast chicken, potato salad, cut up tomatoes from the garden with a salt shaker. So you could find anything you needed down in those pocketbooks, including little tins of snuff that they would use. As a matter of fact, Granny told me the way to figure out if a woman was level-headed was if the snuff trails ran down both sides of her mouth. Well, so when you went to church and you were sitting there in church and you got a little restless and you started to squirm a little bit as a child when they were having tag team preaching going on at the Missionary Baptist Church, which meant that they had 3 preachers and nobody was going home till somebody got saved. And you sitting there on your less than well padded behind, and you would start to squirm. And I would always get the look, I don't even have to show you what the look was, because I can tell most of the people here have gotten the look before from an older relative. Well, I would get the look, and then the pocketbook would be in knee position. There were only 2 positions that pocketbooks were in. Knee position, which was sitting on their knees, white-knuckled, clasped in their hands, so that nobody would steal their $3.14 that they had. And you could not be too careful, not even in church. There might be somebody crawling around underneath the pews, stealing old ladies' pocketbooks, as if they could have picked them up and drugged them somewhere. And they were giant things that had big pieces of hard cardboard down in the bottom, and they were trapezoid shaped, came up. had a hard ridge of plastic across the top with a big old thing about the size of your fist that was up there that acted as a little latch that you could flip back, and it would open up the pocketbook, which would yawn open over to about Morgantown or somewhere. And that was when they would dive down into the pocketbook, you know. So Granny would give me the look. Then she would slowly but surely release her grasp on the pocketbook, and up would go that big fist-sized ball, and it would start to yawn open. And she would dive over into that pocketbook, and then she would come up out of there with a half piece of juicy fruit chewing gum. That's happened to a lot of y'all, I see that. Did you know that there was old lady classes for decorating half pieces of juicy fruit chewing gum? Because everybody I talk to says, what was that stuff that was on the half piece of juicy fruit? And why didn't you ever get a whole piece? Well, they couldn't decorate it if you only had a whole piece, you know. They had to tear it in half the night before and sit there and take all that pocketbook debris and little pieces of lint out of their pockets, of the pants that they had had on all week, and stick that on the top of that juicy fruit chewing gum. Maybe they'd even get, you know, a hair out of the hairbrush and stick it down on there. And then they would get little pieces of snuff and stick it down on there. And then they would have all these little pieces of paper, giblets of paper and stuff that they would decorate the top of it with. And that was to keep you busy. I mean, were you going to be busy with a half piece of juicy fruit chewing gum? No! You'll just sit there and chew it and swallow it after the sugar was gone out of it. I know y'all. But with the decorations, what did you do? You sat there through 3 preachers going, but it kept you busy and you didn't squirm, now did you? So they knew exactly what they were doing some of the time. We were going to Washington, D.C., 1976, going from down in Raleigh, Durham, flying, yes, in an airplane, flying in an airplane. All the way from Raleigh-Durham Airport up to Washington, D.C. It was the first time that these folks had ever been on an airplane. I was the expert airplane rider. I had ridden one way to Philadelphia one time in my life in 1976, so I was the expert, as I thought I was in so many things. Because I had just gotten out of college. A couple of years before that, I had my first job teaching school, and I knew everything there was to know. Oh, Lord, I was so wrong. But I didn't know it then, and it didn't matter because they didn't pay any attention to what I said, not really. I tried my best to prepare them for the great city of Washington, D.C., and how we were going to behave ourselves, and how